First, congratulations. What a great film. And for Leo, for those of us, we've interviewed you many times. Did you identify as someone who didn't grow up very wealthy? You've talked to us about that before. Did you identify with his hunger to have more?
Sure. I'll talk to you about that. I think everyone has some sort of connection to Gatsby as a character. He's a character that has created himself according to his own imagination and dreams, and lifted himself from his own bootstraps as a poor youth in the Midwest, and created this image that is the Great Gatsby, and it's a truly American story in that regard. You know, here is this emerging democracy that is America in the 1920s, and he wants to emulate a Rockefeller of that time period, and of course creates his wealth in the underworld. But this is the new land that is America, and it was a very exciting time, and I think we can all relate to that dreamer in Gatsby. Each one of us gets excited by the prospect of somebody that has, somebody that has, what's the word? What's the word that I'm looking for? It's too early in the morning. Ambition. Somebody that has that much ambition.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Rebecca Theodore, The Urban Daily. Mr. Lerman, I read somewhere that you played a lot of Jay-Z on the set while you were filming. So I wanted to ask the cast which Jay-Z song you liked the most, and how did it help you get into your character or connect to the scene?
We'll start with Carrie.
Oh gosh, don't ask me.
It was in the love scene, remember?
I remember jazz music in the love scene. I don't know. I can't remember. I'm sorry, terrible answer.
We had it at the party scene, but I can't remember what the name of this song was.
I can help you there. Yes, you can. Yeah. But I tell you something about that party scene that might help answer the question. Because if you remember, and I see Toby Maguire going, yes, I remember, we've done all the formal structure of the scene. But Fitzgerald describes in the book, there's a moment, he's in the 20s, and there's a moment when he goes very abstract. He says, people came and go, and Sandwich was there, and I tried to leave, and it gets all blurry. And they've been drinking very heavily. You know that Tom and Myrtle have been in next door. And it's going to a place that gets very, very abstract. And eventually Nick Carraway says, I was both within and without. Our yellow windows had their fair share of human secrets. So we were about 20 minutes away from wrapping, or maybe 30 minutes. I went, we still haven't got that kind of wild party feel. Which, by the way, I might add, the idea of having a wild party was inspired by a book that Leonardo's father gave me called The Wild Party, written in the same period. And I really...
Poems, right?
Say?
It's a poem, right?
Yeah, it's a long poem called The Wild Party, beautifully illustrated, by the way, and George DiCaprio gave me that book. And anyway, we wanted to go there, but we weren't quite sure how to. So Blakey, my assistant, got dressed up as a bellhop, and because it says the bellhop brings sandwiches, so I got all sorts of props and things, and I ran around, had a little chat to everyone. We all sort of had little whispers, and I said, we've got 20 minutes left, let's turn all the cameras on, and let's go for it. So we started with jazz music, and pull me up if I'm expanding on the truth. Tell me if in any way I'm just making stuff up.
I'm married with children.
Yeah.
Not go too far.
Only about a minute of the 20 minutes is in the movie. However, the sort of jazz, and it was fun, and there was a bit of pillow fighting and some photographs being taken. And right in the middle of the jazz, I just turned up very, very loudly. These cameras can run for 20 minutes. Very loudly, a track called NIP, which was a Jay-Z track, which was mixed with jazz at the same time. We'd made this special track. And things took off. And the cameras rolled for 20 minutes. And there was a moment, and you see it in the film, where a very expensive lamp smashes right in the middle of the movie. And my first assistant said, Baz, we've got to shut it down, because by then it was crazy mayhem of of levels you can't imagine. There was clothes coming off and, feather fights and, flowers being thrown. And I remember I grabbed everyone and said, get in the bedroom. And I pushed the Steadicam operator into the bedroom. And they kept rolling him. So that's where the music came in there.
Isla, is that true? Because you were
Yes,
there.
that is true. That's not been embellished.
Leonardo, I wanted to ask you, and maybe any of the other actors could contribute as well, but Gatsby is somebody who is reinvented himself, and that's what I think people have to do when they become actors, especially great actors, to become somebody other than what they were. Did that plug in at all into how you saw Jay Gatsby and what he was doing?
Certainly. The Gatsby that I remember reading when I was 15 years old in junior high school was far different than the Gatsby that I read as an adult. And what I remember from my years in junior high was, this hopeless romantic that was, solely in love with this one woman and created this great amount of wealth to be able to respectably hold her hand. But then to reread it as an adult, it was incredibly fascinating. I mean, it is one of those novels that is talked about almost nearly 100 years later for a reason. It's incredibly nuanced, it's existential, and here at the center of this movie is this man that is incredibly hollow. He's searching for some sort of meaning in his life, and he's attached himself to this relic known as Daisy. She's a mirage, and I was struck by the sadness in him for the first time, and I looked at him completely different. I looked at him as somebody that was very hollow and searching for some sort of meaning, and Nick is the only one that truly sees what's going on in reality. And here's this man that's desperately holding on to this image. And one very telling sequence that we talked about a lot, and for me was a very important one in the book, was after this great caravansary that he's created, known as Gatsby's Castle, in order to lure Daisy in, Nick notices that he's holding her, yet he's still staring out at the green light. He's finally got her in his arms, but he's still searching for this thing that he thinks is going to complete him. And that was the Gatsby that I was incredibly excited about playing as an actor. And so as I got older, it took on new meaning, and I think that's what's so incredible about this novel. Everyone who reads it has their own interpretation of who these people are, who these characters are, and that's what's very difficult about making. I don't know if this answers your question, but that's what's very difficult about making a movie about it, is because everyone has their own sort of personal attachment to this book, and they feel like they know these characters on a very intimate level. And of course, when you're making a movie, you have to be much more specific. Like I said, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that was great.
Thank you.
This question is for Toby and Leo. You guys, I thought, had great chemistry on screen and a great friendship, and it really came across. Did the friendship you already have, do you think that translated into the characters in the role?
What do you think?
Yeah, I think Leo and I have a very kind of trusting and close friendship, so I think that just the kind of comfortable, open dialogue that we had in terms of the working process contributed to what we did. And then in regards to like the actual, like texture, chemistry of the relationship, it's harder for me to judge like what contributed to that, but I'm sure that had an effect there. I think that the Nick and Gatsby relationship is such an interesting relationship to explore, because from my point of view, obviously I'm looking through the eyes of Nick and searching through the book as Nick, and Nick in relationship to Gatsby in particular, and then the way that we made the movie and the way the book sort of is written, he's looking back over his experiences. So there's both the experiences, in real time as he lived them, and then his Nick's relationship to them later. So looking back through who Gatsby was to him personally and as an idea, I think inspires Nick to go off into his own future. And then specifically, I think having an understanding that Gatsby had an agenda for Nick, but ultimately unfolded into a real friendship, and perhaps Gatsby's only friendship, I think was very meaningful to Nick. And I definitely have an affection for Leo, so it's easy for me to have affection for Gatsby as Nick as well.
For me, this is this is like American Shakespeare. This is one of the most celebrated novels of all time. So to venture into a project of this magnitude, it really took a sort of core unit of trust for me, to feel comfortable and to know that, somebody that I've known for 20 years in Baz Luhrmann was involved, and Toby was immediately involved in that process from the onset, was incredibly comforting. We're always extremely honest with each other, and to me, I don't know if this project would have happened unless we had that sort of relationship, because it needed that. We needed those checks and balances, and we needed to have a contract with each other to continually be honest with one another.
Can I add a tiny little thing to that? Because I think these two gentlemen cannot say this, but it's a little anecdote from our first day of shooting. And everything that you've said, I think I concur. But it was the first day of shooting. It was in the flowers scene. And we were all very nervous, because I think what Leonardo touched upon is that we felt we were carrying a very heavy chalice, and a great responsibility, and we'd been partnered up very, very early on. And there was written dialogue in the scene. It's where Gatsby's waiting with Nick for Daisy to arrive. And somewhere in there, the nerves of the craziness, the flowers, too many, too little. And I just thought, well, how are we going to get going? So I put a locked camera on. It's a wide shot. And I just said, and action, you're just waiting for Daisy, but let's not do the scene. Let's just improvise. And Leonardo, I'm going to do incredible Leonardo acting. Better than him. He's doing this. Yes. And then I'm going to do Toby acting. Yeah. And then I think Leonardo says, do you think it's... flowers are lovely, aren't they? Toby goes, yes. Do you think it's too much? And Toby pauses and he goes, no, Nick pauses and looks around and he goes, I think it's what you want. And that moment, I think, is one of the purest and most connected moments in the film. And it completely came from, I think, a depth of relationship that existed before we began rehearsals. And it was funny because it was the first thing we ever shot. And for me, it's one of the most truthful and wonderful moments in the film. So from a director's point of view, there was a grand value in the depth of their friendship. So that's just a side comment.
Let's just talk first a little bit about how this movie came to be. I mean, Catherine, does Baz come to you and say, hey, I've got this idea? You say yay or nay. Then Douglas and Lucy, of course. Where do you come into this? Where does all this whole process start? And how did you get here today?
Well, Baz was an incredible fan of the book. He listened to a talking book. I'm sure most of you will hear the Siberian Railway story from the horse's mouth. I don't need to repeat it. But I very irritatingly, I'd read the book. Obviously, from my accent, I'm Australian. I'd read the book as a teenager. It was part of our high school curriculum. And I didn't connect, I suppose, culturally to some of the themes in the book. So when Baz suggested it, I was slightly a naysayer. And he convinced me as an adult to reread the book. And when I reread it as an adult, I became the book's number one fan. So much to his annoyment, it was like I had made the decision that we were going to do The Great Gatsby. And he said, hang on a minute, you didn't like the book 5 minutes ago until I made you reread it. It was my idea. I've introduced you to this wonderful text, and I'm extremely grateful because just the pleasure of reading the book time and time again has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed dissecting Baz's vision for the book, and also just being able to use it as an amazing resource and to experience it. And I still reread passages of it now because I'm always trying to find references, and it's so fresh and alive and contemporary. So, yes, I was a naysayer, I have to admit, but convinced.
So Lucy,
well, I'll tell you, our version was very lucky. For about 2 years, we had been trying to buy the rights to the book, and they were controlled by A&E, which had once done a TV movie of Gatsby. And so, like everything magnificent about Fitzgerald, here were his rights of one of the great novels of the century held by this TV company and frozen there. So we negotiated for about 2 years. It was a very tough deal. And then we were just closing, and we had agonized over how do you ever make this movie work for a contemporary audience. And the reason we loved the book is that it felt more about now than any other literature. So one day we're in our office on the lot at Sony, and we're having an internal meeting, which is just 2 or 3 employees. And after the meeting, a person who's out in front comes in and says, "Oh, Baz Luhrmann was here." And I said, "Baz Luhrmann was here?" He said, "Yeah, I told him you were in a meeting." And we were in a meeting with... So I go running out of the office down this... down the street, thinking I want to kill this person who's sent away Baz Luhrmann. And so Baz Luhrmann had literally come to visit us to check us out and see if he could possibly stand working with us. I'll let his version, but he's a very careful about... And needless to say, in one conversation with Baz, and there are many pieces of casting, several are here, where you say, boy, if we couldn't get that person, like think of who else you could possibly cast for Gatsby, but maybe even the hardest piece of casting, which is what filmmaker in the world could ever make this movie and make it feel about now. And the fact that that filmmaker had come, knocked on our door, and been sent away, I think about it, and so then I'll let Baz do his version, but just from that early conversation, when he started to address anything in your stomach that if you're medium smart you'd worry about how to make Fitzgerald relevant to a new generation. Right then, he was talking about the parties and what the parties would be like, talking about Gatsby, who he is now, and needless to say, you just suddenly had that profound relief. So somewhere between that meeting, Baz had become incredibly articulate about how to adapt Gatsby.
I thought that was all pretty well covered. And, of course, if I try and answer the question, it will be epic, long, and never-ending. But, I mean, I don't know. Should I attempt
Go
it?
ahead anyway. Who's stopping you?
No one. Baz, may I remind you, this Siberian Express.
Actually,
Yeah, we want to know
it
that
starts
story.
earlier than that.
Okay.
Fade in, a small country town.
I don't think these people are ready for this.
Okay. How about I could do it in bullet points? Yeah.
Okay, well then we'll go to the next question.
I think the epic version is out there somewhere in print.
Okay, we'll get that. Go ahead.
A couple of you have already spoken about coming across this book in junior high school, and I did as well. And in rereading it for this project, I was really struck by, wow, this is really something that I didn't really get the full scope of when I read it the first time. I'm wondering what you think Fitzgerald would think about being sort of a cornerstone of YA fiction.
YA fiction?
Yeah, I mean, do you really think it's aimed for a young adult market, and is that something you're looking at?
What was YA fiction?
Oh, young adult, like sort of...
Oh.
Twilight.
Yeah. Twilight, thank you.
I mean, he was a young adult himself when he wrote it. I mean, he wasn't far beyond that. He was moving into that transition. You can never know what F. Scott Fitzgerald would really think, but there's a lot of... I mean, there's one thing I'm pretty sure about. When F. Scott Fitzgerald was about to die, and, you know, we worked with some of the great academics. My assistant, I have a couple of assistants, they're well known to the group here, one called Blakey, who's in the house, one called Skrilla, whose name is not Skrilla, his name's Sam Bromell, and his uncle is in fact a chap who died recently, sadly, only the last few weeks.
Really?
Yes.
Like,
Henry
really?
Bromell, and Henry Bromell made a film. These are things that are always kept secret with Sam. He's from a secretive family. His uncle made a film called The Last Days of Fitzgerald with Jeremy Irons in it. And it was the last day of Fitzgerald in Hollywood. And when Fitzgerald was about to die, he was going into shops buying copies of his own book, The Great Gatsby, just so there would be a few sales registered at the publishing company. I don't know what he would think about this film, but the fact that he's the #1 selling book in America today, I know he'd feel pretty good about that. So that's probably the only thing I could contribute is that the fact that the book has endured, the fact that, I mean, when I think that we're opening here in New York, 20 minutes from where he wrote it on Long Island, and we're also opening in the Cannes Film Festival, while he was writing some of the most painful passages in The Great Gatsby, down on the beach where the Palais is, his wife was having an affair with a French officer. How could he know that 88 years later, that book would be turned into a drama with a collection of I'll say this, the finest actors in the world, playing out that book and in 3D? How could he know that?
I've also recently heard F. Scott Fitzgerald in The Great Gatsby be compared to Shakespeare by Leo a couple minutes ago. I think he would like that.
When he died, there were 4,000 copies of the book in print. And some little-known facts are when it was published, and there's great correspondence between him and his editor, Maxwell Perkins, if anybody's interested, in which Fitzgerald is pouring his heart out and writing for money and just hoping that the book will sell. And it had very mixed reviews when it came out. And its two big fans, his two memorable big fans, were T.S. Eliot and Edith Wharton. But the public more or less rejected it until Lionel Trilling came along in the 40s and reclaimed it as the great American novel, at which point it was sent actually to the soldiers in World War II as a little piece of Americana. And then later became read in every high school. So it's had an interesting history. But when he died, literally 4,000 were in print, and he had no idea that it was going to be reclaimed and redeemed the way it was.
Wow.
Good morning. Baz, I'm curious about the home. Was that real? Did it exist? And for Leo, did you want to do the method acting thing and live there maybe while you were making this movie, if it was actually existing?
I did the whole time.
I used to come in the morning and say, "Please wake Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Lerman is ready to give him his close-up." And then a dozen servants would tap on his door, and he'd come down in a dressing gown and say, "I'm ready." Do you mean Gatsby's Mansion? You know, Gatsby's Mansion is my old high school. Yeah. I don't know if that de-romanticized.
That's the exterior, Baz.
The exterior. Actually, I'll tell you what it was.
Honestly.
We made the whole
Amigo.
film in We made the... My wife is the fact checker. I'm in the storytelling business. But we made the challenge was to make the whole film in Australia. And we were going to make it in New York, actually. And it became impossible. So, and it's out there now, I think, some of this story, the dangerous moment, the project maybe being lost. Doug and Lucy, by the way, the connection there is true. And I always thought Doug and Lucy at the most difficult times were the greatest barrackers. You know, a bit like if I was out running with the ball, they're like, "Oh, okay, you can do it. Just getting it alive." But Australia became an absolute part of the equation economically, and there was a great plus. We felt we could create this grand illusion. And we were able to work with lots of our long-term collaborators, our team, our Mr. Cha-Chas, our Gracies, our artisans. But we had to create Long Island in Australia. And that brought a bit of a weird problem, which we could never have foreseen. There was one mountain in Australia. Yeah, I don't want to bring it up because he gets... I'm getting hives, actually. There was this one mountain where in the 1850s, the English people went, because it was so hot, and they were wearing, obviously, crinolines, very hot clothes. And they went up and they planted trees, deciduous trees, which looked a bit like the East Coast here in England. It looked English, right, like English country gardens. Top of a mountain was about one mountain only. Everything else was gum trees in Australia. And we were going to create Long Island, the driving, the cottage. We were going to do it all up there. Well, we went up there. It rained. We got rained out once. We got rained out twice. We got rained out 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Eventually, I think we made Nick's little tiny cottage in 4 or 5 different locations in 6 ways. And then we shut down. We went away. We still hadn't finished. We came back in February when the sun came out, and it rained again. Right? So it was, and there's a little documentary on this. It's called El Nino. It was a raining phenomena. That's an understatement. However, we had to create illusion, and I think the mansion, the exterior of the mansion, is what used to be called the Cardinal's Palace, and I went to a Catholic boys' school there for a short time. It's connected to the back of it, but it was grand enough to look like this kind of, as Fitzgerald describes it, it looked like a Normandy castle. So, Gatsby's mansion was a fantasia. We called it the Disney for adults castle, where, of course, across the water, where the aristocrats are, their architecture was much more, landed gentry. It was much more of the South. So that was kind of the thinking behind that. And
I can't elaborate any more on the castle than he has, but I will say that what was interesting is, your original intent was to shoot in New York, and for budgetary reasons, we shipped the whole production to Australia. And I think what was amazing about shooting in Australia and recreating all these sets and this entire world was the incredible enthusiasm and work ethic of all the people there. I think it infused us with this great energy. I mean, every actor besides 3 or 4 were Australian actors, and the entire crew was Australian. Everyone had this amazing enthusiasm about bringing this production there, and their work ethic was tireless, and their enthusiasm for this project was tireless, and I don't think it would have been infused with the same energy and passion had we not shot there. Truly, I really admired how passionate everyone was about having this production there. It was an amazing experience.
Seemingly, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So, Toby, Leonardo, why do you think history keeps repeating itself?
In general?
Well, this is a very, Baz talks about it a lot, but in a lot of ways, this book predicted the great crash in the early 1930s in America. It's a book that talks about the great opulence and wealth in America during that time period, and the idea that the future is endless and we can keep consuming and living the way we do without any consequences. And it is timeless in the sense that is an 80-year cycle. We've encountered it again in our modern era, and it's something that we keep doing. And it's not just an American novel in that regard. It's something that's happening worldwide. Fitzgerald was very much commenting on society and human nature and the great pursuit of wealth, and it's a timeless novel in that regard.
Carrie, I think in many ways you may have one of the most difficult roles because you couldn't react. You were just.
Couldn't react.
We couldn't really. You
couldn't
not act. You couldn't. No. You couldn't react. I mean, you had to just react. I mean, you just had to do what all these other people were. You didn't get to be the party girl and like Isla, who had so much fun, and you couldn't make a commitment. You could only play interest. How difficult was this role?
No, I mean, I think that's sort of the core part of her, is that she's very easily led and she's drawn to the strongest force in the room. So I think she reacts. She's very reactive. I just don't think she acts very well. I don't think she makes decisions for herself. So I loved it. I got to... there were so many turns in her personality, and so often she doesn't say what she means, and so often she says things for effect. And that's really fun to play.
I mean, I think for you, like, this is my observation of Daisy, but for me, she was the most interesting character to costume, because I think for modern women, she's difficult to connect with at first, because you think, you know, she's just the woman that kind of let Gatsby go. But I think there's an incredibly telling scene when you realise that Daisy is a product of her era and a product of her kind of sociological milieu, when she says outside to Nick, you know, when my daughter was born, I just hoped she'd be a fool, because that's the best thing a girl can be, a beautiful little fool. And in that moment you realise that Daisy isn't a fool, but she is trapped within her own circumstances. And I think, you know, you create an incredibly attractive character, and you understand why, you know, Gatsby loves her. And you also understand her flaws. You feel sympathy for her. And I think that fragility of personality, you know, not everyone is Jordan Baker. Not everyone is built for the modern world. And you were basically born and bred to be a trophy wife. But you're smarter than that. And it's a difficult place to be.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the question for Carrie. You play a woman of privilege at the time, but in many ways a woman with no privilege. And how did you get into the head of a woman of that time? And what influence do you think those women have today, on women today?
When we started talking about Daisy, Baz gave me about 7 books about Zelda Fitzgerald. Boom, and told me to read them all.
In the morning.
And then a lot, I was lucky enough to read all of the love letters from Ginevra King to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And because there are holes in Daisy's character, and you meet her at the beginning of the story, and then she disappears for a long time, and often she's not saying what she means, and often she's sort of acting quite erratically. There was quite a lot to fill in just to make her, you know, to play her consistently. And Zelda and Ginevra were the 2 women that we based her on, and obviously her in the novel. So it's kind of a cocktail of those people, and really just reading about how people spoke about them in the time when they were young, the way that they were raised, especially Ginevra King, in terms she came from a very wealthy family, and the way that Zelda was described by people when she was younger. Somebody said that she had as few cares as a puppy or a kitten, which was always a good one to remember. And we just talked about, you know, she was a product of her time. It was when I defend Daisy, I always say that she came from a family who would have encouraged and expected her to marry for money, and had she done anything else, it would have been scandalous. So it's hardly weakness of character at that point. So yeah, we just talked a lot about the kind of family that she was raised in.
And how do you feel those women have influence today?
What kind of women? Sorry.
Women of the time, because they were also more liberated than women preceding.
I don't quite understand. I don't understand the question. In terms of how women were viewed.
What do you see in the influence on women today?
From women in the 20s? Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, we've become more and more liberated, I hope. And people still get trapped in loveless marriages, and people certainly marry for the wrong reasons all the time. But I think we've just grown more and more, really.
I think you've got to...
You say something, you probably...
I'm going to back you up.
I got one now.
No, she nailed it.
Isla, a question.
Oh my God, no. I'll just add on that rather than answer a question that we can vote now. Clearly, we're liberated from a corset. We bobbed our hair. We're free to a degree.
You know, Isla's got a good point. I think the point is that Tom Buchanan says women run around too much these days. The thing is that Daisy is trapped in a cage of the previous century, but there are all these flapper girls. There's this. We in our research, there were mothers who took their daughters to court because the length they were wearing their dresses.
Absolutely correct. They should do that.
You know?
They should do that today.
And they went to jail.
Disgusting filth.
Hey, I want to add a quick thing about this cast. You know, what Kerry can't say and what none of the actors can say is that we went on an intense research journey together. And we, you know, Kerry went down to Princeton with Don Schemmer, who runs the library down there. We had, you know, experts on, you know, speakeasies come in. The thing is that all of these actors here, there's a beautiful moment in which she goes, I wish I'd spent all those days with you. These are lines from Zelda Fitzgerald letters to Scott, some of that dialogue. Some of the lines that Kerry speaks are from letters from Geneva King that she found in the library. And Leonardo, who went everywhere with a copy of Trimalchio like this. You know, I mean, Toby, Leonardo, and I do think I'm not expanding on the truth. Was it 2 a.m? Was it 12? I don't know. Going round and round and round in a room, over and over and over a scene, and like sharks smelling blood in the water, looking for that extra line from a Trimalchio, looking for that extra piece, looking for that extra detail. Same with Isla in terms of the scenes. Any way in, any scrap, any hint. And we were a theatre company. And in the same way you're a theatre company, it was a true collaboration, a collaboration that began extremely early with Leonardo and Toby. I mean, way before we even got a green light. And then as each actor came in, they became part of the collaborative writing process. And so, you know, on the set every day, Kerry would say, don't you think I could get that line in just there? It would be perfect. And it was.